Faded glory, the trial of truth. The courtroom was packed. The air was thick with tension, the kind that only comes when a battle far greater than the people involved is unfolding. This wasn't just a trial. It was a war of ideas, a clash of civilizations, a fight for the very foundation of truth itself. At the defendant's table sat Commander Carlos, clad in a worn military jacket, his hands resting calmly on the table. His eyes, sharp as ever, scanned the faces in the room. Beside him sat Raven, poised like a predator waiting to strike, her piercing gaze locked on the opposition. Behind them, members of the Global Union Tribunal sat in black robes, their expressions cold and calculating. On the opposite side of the room stood Dr. Matthias Kruger, the lead prosecutor. A man of science, logic, and what he called rational enlightenment, he had built his career dismantling belief in the divine, arguing that faith was nothing more than a relic of the past, a crutch for the weak. The architect, the self-proclaimed ruler of the world, sat in the judge's seat, draped in his ceremonial robe, a twisted smile playing on his lips. The symbol of the Global Union gleamed behind him, a metallic hand gripping the earth, a sign of absolute control. Carlos and Raven were on trial for heresy, a crime in the New World Order where faith in God was considered an act of rebellion. The opening salvo Kruger stepped forward, his voice dripping with smug confidence. Ladies and gentlemen, today we gather here not to debate but to clarify a simple fact. Belief in God is an unproven claim. Faith is superstition, an outdated relic that has no place in a society governed by reason. The accused, Commander Carlos and his associate Rachel Eldridge, have spread dangerous falsehoods, indoctrinating the weak, encouraging rebellion, and undermining the peace we have worked so hard to build. Carlos smirked. He had faced death 100 times over, fought in wars no one dared to speak of, and had taken down enemies far more formidable than this self-righteous bureaucrat. He leaned forward. Funny thing about reason, it seems to shift based on who's in power. A murmur spread through the crowd. Kruger's face hardened. That's the difference between us. I deal in facts, you deal in fantasy. Carlos chuckled. Then let's talk facts. The evidence for truth. Carlos stood up and walked toward the center of the room. You say faith is superstition, that believing in something without evidence is irrational. But tell me, Dr. Kruger, do you believe in morality? Kruger frowned. Of course. And where does morality come from? From society. From the agreements we make as a people. Carlos nodded. Ah, so morality is just an opinion? Just a social contract? Kruger rolled his eyes. That's not what I said. But that's exactly what your worldview leads to. If there's no God, no higher law, then morality is just a game of power. It changes depending on who sits in that chair. Carlos gestured to the architect, who watched with mild amusement. The Soviet Union thought it was moral to starve millions. Mao thought it was moral to slaughter those who disagreed with him. If morality is just a social construct, then who's to say they were wrong? Kruger's face twisted in frustration. We learn from history, from progress. Carlos stepped closer. History doesn't judge morality. Power does. And you know that. Raven, silent until now, leaned forward. We fought wars to stop people like you before, and we'll do it again. Kruger clenched his jaw. You're making a false equivalence. The atrocities of the past weren't caused by atheism. They were caused by authoritarianism. Carlos narrowed his eyes. No. They were caused by a system that denied the existence of objective truth. A system that believed morality was flexible, that right and wrong were just constructs. Atheism doesn't free people. It enslaves them to the rule of those in power. The cross-examination Kruger, now visibly agitated, pointed an accusatory finger at Carlos. So you believe in an invisible deity with no proof and expect us to take your word for it? Carlos smirked. First, there is plenty of evidence. You just refuse to acknowledge it. Second, your own argument collapses under scrutiny. You say you only believe in what's proven, but tell me, can you prove love? Can you prove justice? Can you prove that logic itself is anything more than a human concept? Silence. You live by faith, Kruger. Faith in reason, faith in human institutions, faith that your worldview is right, even when it can't explain the things that matter most. The difference is, my faith isn't in men who change their minds every decade. My faith is in the one who never changes. The verdict. The architect clapped slowly, his face unreadable. A most entertaining debate indeed. He leaned forward, his fingers tapping the armrest of his throne-like chair. But you misunderstand something, Carlos. This trial isn't about truth, it's about power, and I hold it. The gavel slammed. Commander Carlos Rachel Eldridge, you are guilty of heresy against the Global Union. The sentence is exile to the wastes. The guards advanced, weapons raised. Carlos turned to Raven, his expression calm. We knew this was coming. She nodded, her fingers twitching over the concealed blade at her waist. As the soldiers reached for them, Carlos whispered, "Faith isn't about survival. It's about standing even when the whole world kneels." With a sudden movement, Raven struck. The battle for truth was far from over. To be continued. This faded glory story takes the themes from the rebuttal, moral relativism, objective truth, the historical failures of atheism, and the necessity of faith in a world dominated by power, and weaves them into a thrilling dystopian courtroom drama. Would you like me to expand on this storyline further? Perhaps a prison escape arc or a resistance movement led by Carlos and Raven?